The wind howled across the jagged cliffs of Ralthar, carrying dust and the faint scent of alien flora. Ethan crouched behind a rock watching the forest below with careful eyes. His mission was simple in theory. Observe the Drakari hunting grounds, gather data, and report back to human command. In practice, it was anything but simple. The Drakari were a predator species, known for their strength, speed, and ruthless pack tactics. Every step he took had to be measured, every sound considered. One mistake, and he would not walk back to his ship alive. He had spent weeks studying them, learning from old records, intercepted communications, and the few survivors who had escaped previous encounters. The Drakari were not just hunters, they were organized. They had ranks, rituals, and a sense of pride that made them unpredictable. Ethan's orders had been clear. Survival came first, but he had also been told that sometimes survival required taking risks that others would not. This mission was one of those times. As he observed the forest, Ethan noticed movement in the corner of his eye. 3 Drakari hunters emerged from the shadows, their limbs longer than a human's. Their skin a deep bronze with streaks of black that blended into the underbrush. They moved like a single organism, silent and precise. Ethan's heart pounded, but he stayed still, letting his camouflage and the shadows protect him. One of the Drakari sniffed the air, head tilting slightly as if sensing something unusual. Ethan knew this was the moment when human caution was worth nothing. Slowly he reached into his pack and pulled out a small device, a mimic of forest sounds. He activated it quietly, creating the sound of rustling leaves in a distant part of the forest. The Drakari paused, confused, then shifted their attention away from him. Ethan exhaled slowly, careful not to make a sound. He had managed to avoid detection this time, but he knew he could not remain hidden forever. His mission required getting closer, learning more about the Drakari's den, their rituals, and their weaknesses. He adjusted his approach, moving from shadow to shadow, always keeping the forest between himself and the hunters. Hours passed, and the sun began to set. The forest glowed with bioluminescent plants, casting eerie lights that made the shadows dance. Ethan felt a twinge of unease. He had been careful, but the Drakari were patient hunters. They could wait for days for a small prey like him. Then it happened. A branch snapped under his foot, a tiny sound, but enough. The 3 hunters froze immediately, their eyes locking onto his position. Ethan had no time to react. They surged forward with terrifying speed, closing the distance in seconds. His legs carried him, but the terrain was unforgiving. Rocks and roots tore at his clothing, his muscles burned, and yet he ran, knowing that any stumble could be fatal. The hunters leapt. Claws extended, but Ethan ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the first strike. His mind raced. This was exactly as it had been planned. He had known capture was possible. In fact, it had been expected. The humans behind this mission had a strategy, one that required him to be taken alive. This was not a failure. It was part of a greater plan. Still, being part of a plan did not make being captured any easier. The Drakari hunters were relentless. They cornered him near a cliffside, and Ethan realized he had only one option: surrender. A wrong move could cost him his life before the real mission even began. One of the Drakari stepped forward, towering over him. Its eyes glowed faintly, intelligent and sharp. Ethan raised his hands slowly, showing no resistance while keeping his mind alert. Every instinct screamed to fight, but fighting would be useless against 3 predators who had been bred to hunt in packs. The Drakari leader growled, a sound that vibrated through the ground. Then, almost unexpectedly, it gestured to the others. They surrounded Ethan but did not strike. Instead, they seemed to examine him, their heads tilting, their eyes studying him like an object of curiosity. They did not bind him immediately, but one of them nudged him forward with a clawed hand. He stumbled, then regained his balance, understanding that resistance would provoke violence. With careful steps, he followed them. The forest seemed to close in around him, the bioluminescent plants casting strange shadows that flickered across the Drakari's muscular forms. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a massive cavern nestled in the cliffs, a place that clearly served as their den. Inside, the walls were lined with trophies, bones of alien creatures, broken weapons, and artifacts from past hunts. The air was thick with a mix of scents, some sharp, some faintly sweet, and all alien. Ethan's stomach twisted. This was not just a den. It was a museum of conquest, and he was the newest exhibit. The Drakari set him down carefully, but the message was clear. He was now their captive. Ethan forced himself to remain calm, noting every detail of the den, the positions of the hunters, and the interactions among them. He could see two other Drakari in the shadows, larger, more imposing, clearly leaders. They exchanged glances, communicating in subtle gestures and low growls. Ethan realized the importance of observation. He had to understand their hierarchy if he wanted to survive. The leaders were watching him now, their eyes sharp and calculating. He forced a small, respectful bow, mimicking the subtle gestures he had seen in old records. To his surprise, one of the leaders inclined its head slightly. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Days passed in a strange rhythm. The Drakari fed him, but only enough to keep him alive. They allowed him to move in certain areas of the den under supervision, perhaps testing his behavior. Ethan used this time to study them. He noticed patterns, how they communicated, how they respected strength, and how they reacted to danger. He also began to plant seeds of influence. Using subtle observations, he hinted at dangers beyond the den, predators in the deeper forests, environmental hazards, and even rival Drakari packs. He spoke carefully, using their language as best as he could, relying on gestures and intonation. The leaders listened, their curiosity piqued. They had never seen a human with such knowledge and composure in their den. One evening, as bioluminescent light bathed the cavern, Ethan noticed a change in the leaders' behavior. The two rivals who usually ignored each other were now exchanging brief, cautious glances. His presence had shifted the balance of power. The more he spoke, the more they seemed to consider the possibility that survival required cooperation. Ethan realized the true nature of his mission. He had not just been captured to gather information. He had been bait. His capture was meant to bring these two leaders together, to force them to cooperate in ways they had never considered. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. His survival was intertwined with the success of a plan far larger than he had imagined. That night, Ethan lay on the floor of the den, his back against cold rock. The sounds of the Drakari around him were both terrifying and mesmerizing. He thought about the humans waiting for his report, about the aliens who were beginning to see him as more than prey, and about the mission that was only just beginning. A sudden commotion in the den caught his attention. One of the leaders had approached a young Drakari, a subordinate, and gestured sharply. The subordinate moved quickly, carrying something to the far side of the cavern. Ethan's curiosity piqued. He could see the leader's intent, testing loyalty, measuring reactions, and asserting authority. Every small action was a lesson, a display of power, and a potential opportunity for him to influence the outcome. Hours later, the two rival leaders met in the center of the den. Their eyes locked, muscles tensing, and Ethan felt the air shift. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He observed quietly, noting how each leader evaluated the other, how respect and rivalry intertwined, and how his presence silently influenced the interaction. Ethan understood that the next few days would be critical. Every word he spoke, every action he took, could shape the relationship between these two powerful beings. If he played his role well, he could unite them, turning potential conflict into an alliance. If he failed, he would become nothing more than a forgotten trophy in their den. As he settled down for the night, the glow of the forest outside the cavern casting eerie light across the walls, Ethan made a silent vow. He would survive. He would complete the mission. And he would turn his capture into a victory, not just for humanity, but for the delicate balance of this alien world. For the first time since he had been captured, Ethan allowed himself a small, quiet smile. The hunt had begun, but this time he was not just prey. He was the bait, the strategist, and the catalyst for something far greater than any human had imagined. The den was quiet that night, but the tension in the air was almost tangible. Ethan lay on the cold rock floor, listening to the low hum of the Drakari leader's communication, a series of growls, clicks, and subtle gestures. Each sound carried meaning, and Ethan had learned to read them carefully. He realized the plan was already working. His presence had unsettled the usual hierarchy, forcing the two leaders to pay attention to each other. At dawn, the larger of the two leaders approached him. Its eyes were sharp, intelligent, and curious rather than aggressive. Ethan had learned to bow slightly whenever they came close, showing respect without submission. The leader's growl was low and steady, a sound that seemed almost contemplative. It circled him once, then returned to its place near the entrance of the den. Ethan's mind was already working ahead. He had to escalate the tension carefully, guiding the two leaders toward cooperation. He remembered the human devices hidden in his pack, small light emitters and noise generators. These were simple tools, but he could use them to create the illusion of danger, something that would force the rival leaders to rely on each other. The next day, he began planting subtle clues. A scratch here, a broken branch there, faint signs of movement deep in the forest that suggested a predator was approaching. He never directly mentioned humans outside or traps, only spoke of a powerful predator that had been observed hunting in distant regions. The leaders listened. Their curiosity grew, their movements became more cautious, and they started occasionally glancing at each other with suspicion and interest. By mid-morning, the tension reached a new level. Ethan watched as the two leaders debated in low growls, gesturing sharply. The younger Drakari subordinates followed every signal, and the den seemed to vibrate with the unspoken conflict. Ethan remained still, observing, careful not to make a wrong move. He had become part of their social experiment, and he knew the consequences of failure would be fatal. Then the moment he had been preparing for arrived. A loud, unnatural roar echoed through the cliffs and forests outside the den. Ethan activated one of his noise devices remotely. The sound of a massive predator filled the air, shaking the walls and rattling the trophies on the shelves. The two leaders froze, their eyes widening. Their rivalry, which had seemed immovable, now had a common threat. Instinctively, they moved closer together, assessing the situation. Ethan knew this was his chance. Using gestures and carefully chosen clicks, he guided them to a strategic position within the den that he had observed would provide the best advantage against the predator. It required them to trust him, at least enough to follow his lead. Both leaders hesitated, but the fear of the predator outweighed their distrust of each other. As they moved, Ethan observed their body language. Each step revealed more about their culture, their hierarchy, and their capacity for cooperation. He realized that despite their ferocity, the Drakari were capable of rational decisions when survival demanded it. This knowledge was invaluable, not just for his mission, but for humanity's understanding of this alien species. Hours passed as the predator approached, a fabricated threat amplified by his devices and subtle environmental cues. The two leaders, once rivals, now coordinated their movements, using signals Ethan had taught them, almost without realizing it. They began to share territory, defending each other's positions and forming a tentative bond. Ethan stayed in the background, careful not to intervene directly, letting them discover the benefits of cooperation on their own. Finally, the predator arrived, or at least Ethan made it seem to arrive. He used shadows, sounds, and vibrations to simulate its presence. The leaders sprang into action together, setting traps, positioning themselves strategically and using their strength and speed to defend the den. Ethan watched as they executed plans he could not have anticipated, their instincts and intelligence combining to create a force far greater than either could manage alone. After what felt like hours, the predator was gone. Ethan deactivated his devices slowly, letting the den settle back into a cautious calm. The two leaders faced each other, breathing heavily, eyes sharp, but there was a new respect between them. They had survived together, and Ethan realized that his mission was nearly complete. He stepped forward carefully, bowing slightly as he did. The larger leader growled softly, a sound that Ethan had learned to interpret as acknowledgement. The smaller leader did the same. For the first time, he felt a sense of accomplishment not born from survival alone, but from subtle strategy and influence. He had turned a dangerous situation into an opportunity to reshape an alien hierarchy. In the following days, Ethan continued to observe and guide them, but now with less deception. The leaders had begun to protect him, seeing him not just as prey but as a strategist, a mind worth considering. Ethan noted how they communicated, how they shared hunting responsibilities, and how they started looking to him for suggestions in subtle ways. Every interaction reinforced the fragile alliance he had created. One evening, as the bioluminescent forest light filtered into the den, Ethan realized that his capture had achieved more than anyone had expected. The two leaders, who had once been mortal rivals, now moved through the den in coordinated harmony. They still retained their pride and independence, but a bond had formed, forged by survival and guided by human intelligence. Ethan's thoughts drifted to the humans waiting for his report. They had planned for him to be bait, but he had exceeded expectations. He had not only survived, but had actively shaped the outcome, proving that human ingenuity could influence even the most alien of societies. The implications were staggering. If humanity could apply this understanding wisely, they could turn potential threats into allies, and rivals into partners. As he prepared for the humans to retrieve him, Ethan reflected on the lessons he had learned. Fear was powerful, but intelligence, patience, and subtle influence were far more effective. Even beings far stronger and more ferocious than humans could be guided toward cooperation if approached with understanding and strategy. Finally, the retrieval team arrived. Hovercrafts descended, lights cutting through the forest canopy, and human voices called his name. The two Drakari leaders watched cautiously as Ethan approached the extraction point. He turned to them, bowing slightly one last time. Their responses were subtle but meaningful. A nod, a quiet growl, a shared glance. Trust had been established, and a fragile alliance remained. As the hovercraft lifted off, Ethan looked down at the den and the two leaders standing together. He realized that the mission's success was not just in surviving or returning, but in the changes he had created. His capture had been a risk, but it had been worth it. The Drakari were no longer merely rivals, they were partners in a new balance, one influenced by human strategy and courage. The journey back to the human base was quiet. Ethan's mind replayed every moment, every decision, every subtle gesture that had shaped the outcome. He knew that this experience would become a case study, a lesson in how humans could navigate the complexities of alien societies. It was a victory not of brute force, but of intellect, patience, and understanding. Back at the base, Ethan debriefed his superiors. His report was detailed, precise, and filled with insights into Drakari behavior, culture, and potential for alliance. Every observation reinforced the principle that humans, though smaller and physically weaker, could influence, survive, and thrive even among the most fearsome alien species. And though he was physically exhausted, mentally he felt triumphant. He had been captured, used as bait, and thrown into a den of predators, but he had emerged not just alive but victorious. Humanity had gained allies, knowledge, and proof that intelligence and strategy could turn even the most dangerous situation into an opportunity. Ethan's mission had begun as a simple reconnaissance, but it had become a testament to human ingenuity and courage. He had turned his capture into a catalyst for change, showing that one human could influence the fate of an alien species, guide rivals toward cooperation, and survive in a world where few others could. As he looked out over the horizon from the base, Ethan knew that this was only the beginning. The universe was vast, full of unknown threats and opportunities, and humanity's greatest strength was not its weapons, but its mind. And if one human could shape the future of a predator species on a distant planet, imagine what humans could achieve across the stars. For Ethan, the mission had ended, but the adventure of human influence, courage, and ingenuity had only just begun.